Okay, this is English 101, week 13, part 9. Um, the sort of last thing that needs to be said, I think, about these two essays. We've gone over the From in detail. We've gone over the Roderick. And again, if you have questions about those, ask me. If you anything you need to know, ask me now, because you kind of can't ask me questions about the essays between December 11th and 13th. So you've got to get your questions about these things into me by December 10th, so I can answer you. Because you don't want to be asking me while people are working on their assignments, because it would really be unfair if I answered your questions and not other people, and it becomes tricky. So you get questions about Roderick and From to me, discussion. Get on the discussion board and ask me there, so other people can see. But you can also email me if you want to, any questions you have. The last thing is that you're gonna, so the English department is gonna come up with 3 questions for you for the final exam. You're only going to answer 1. Don't, every semester, some dumb answers all 3 questions. Don't be that person, because you'll get a D. And also, don't be the person that forgets to quote both Roderick and From, because you'll also get a D. So you're going to get 3 questions, and the questions are going to ask your opinion on something. You're going to give your opinion on it with reasons and examples, and then somewhere in there you're going to quote Roderick, and somewhere in there you're going to quote From. And when I say quote, I mean quote, put it in your own words, give me examples to explain it. How much do you agree? Why do you agree? Examples, blah blah blah. And again, you can quote them because you agree with them, or you can quote them because you disagree with them, whatever reason. But you got to use them in there somewhere. But one thing you want to be thinking about now is whatever they're going to ask you, and I don't know what it is. One of the things they're going to ask, whatever they ask you, they've designed the questions so that you will be able to quote from and Roderick. They're not like random questions and you have to figure out how to connect Roderick and From to the topic. They want you to quote Roderick and From, and so they've designed the questions in such a way that you'll be able to. So whatever they ask you will have something to do with Roderick and something to do with From. So it's worth thinking about links between the two ahead of time. It's not cheating to consider why. Because they gave you these 2 essays to study, and they want you to do your paper for the departmental final on mentioning and discussing these 2 essays. So, like, what do they have in common? One of the things to consider is From writes this whole complex article about obedience and disobedience. And he says people need to be disobedient because too much obedience is going to get us all killed. Because if we keep following the orders of the people in charge are stupid and terrible because they have caveman emotions. And if we keep obeying them, we're all going to die. And when you look at From and Roderick, very quickly, you'll be like, there's not really a lot of connection. This guy's talking about psychological theory about why obedience and disobedience, and Roderick is talking about enjoying Black Panther. What the hell is the connection? At least one connection to think about is the ways in which that Becky lady who gets on to mess with the Black joy of the author, isn't that a form of control? Isn't that a form of obedience? Because joyful Black people are going to be harder to control than Black people who are used to seeing suffering all the time. And of course, and the author of the article talks about how joy is a form of fighting against white supremacy and fighting against a culture that doesn't seem to want Black people to be happy, that wants to murder them or dwell on their suffering or whatever. So, and she says Black joy is a form of resistance to anti-Blackness. Sorry, my cats are fighting each other, so I have to make sure everybody's being safe. That joy is a form of resistance, which means it's a form of disobedience. That's a key link between these 2 texts. Black joy is a form of disobedience to a dominant white culture, which seems to expect Black people to want to spend all of their time on suffering. So I think that's a key thing to be thinking. Sorry, I got very distracted by these cats because they're being crazy. They're very cute. So that's a key thing to be thinking about with these essays. Yeah, and it's funny because I think Becky, I keep saying Becky, her name's not really Becky, but Becky, what's interesting about that is she doesn't even know she's doing it. I think that all she's just like, oh, it didn't bring, well, I guess everybody forgot about the Matrix and Blade or whatever. She doesn't think she didn't get on there to be like, I'm gonna ruin this woman's day. But like, without even thinking about it, the effect of her words is to dampen black joy. And like, she wouldn't probably think about it in those terms, but that is what she's doing. It may not be what she meant to do, but it's what she's doing. And again, I'm sure you've hurt someone's feelings and didn't mean to. Doesn't mean you didn't hurt their feelings. You did. Even though you didn't mean to hurt their feelings, it still happened. And in the same way, I don't think she's meaning to be like, she's not like a white supremacist Nazi or something, but she is working with the cultural norm, which is that black people aren't supposed to be happy. And that needs to be resisted, and the way to resist that is through black joy, a form of disobedience against the dominant culture. Because if black people are too obedient to how they're supposed to act, or in how white culture expects them to act, where if you see movies, it seems like all the black people are criminals or they're being tortured or whatever. That's the norm in media, and that black joy and these kinds of things is a form of disobedience that is. Eric Fromm, I think, would really like it. It's an interesting one way of thinking about these essays is, what if Roderick is a great example of the kind of disobedience that Eric Fromm is talking about. So I think that's a big thing to think about before you go into these essays. And there are other connections between the two. I think it's something you should think about in the discussion boards. If you see links between Roderick and Fromm, look for those and talk about them on the discussion board, so we can begin thinking about, so you can begin imagining what the questions might be, to kind of prepare yourself for paper 4 and the departmental final exam. Cool. And I think that might be everything I have to say. I think maybe I'm kind of done for the semester at this point. I don't have a ton of sort of closing words to say. Obviously you can still get a hold of me. I may make some kind of final farewell video or whatever. I keep thinking of examples of like ridiculous things. A lot of, can I suggest this too, to think about? A lot of racism and a lot of misogyny, which is being against women, involves, how do I put this? A lot of it centers around joy, and controlling people's joy. And worried that a lot of the when you think about racism and people gets racism against women, a lot of it has to do with joy. It's like, sometimes people are upset that someone different from them is getting more joy, and then they're mad. It's worth thinking about that. Like, there are stereotypes about this race is so obsessed with a certain kind of food, or this race or this gender gets more pleasure from sex. These are all examples of joy. And there's a feeling, I think a lot of racism and sexism and all kinds of things are anchored in this idea that, like, oh no, what if that person has more joy than I do? And they have a perverse joy, or it's a weird kind of joy. I don't have access to that kind of joy. This is bad. Why am I not involved in this? How come I can't have that much joy? That's something to think about in a larger context when because you may not be black and you may not, but that doesn't mean you can't take the Roderick. The ideas in Roderick that a certain kind of joy that is non-normal joy, that is not like if you think about white culture being dominant in America, and there's like other cultures that are non-white and non-male and non-whatever, you can think of examples of joy in non-dominant joy coming from people who are not in charge, as a form of resistance. Not just black people, but lots of people. Again, think about how much homophobia centers around sex acts, and that's joy. Because and also a lot of heterosexual sex is about having children, but a lot of queer sex is just about pleasure, joy. Masturbation too is one of those topics that gets people crazy and they get so upset, but again, it's because it's joy. So be on the lookout for non-normal joy and the way in which normal culture polices joy and tries to dampen joy. Not just black joy, but lots of kinds of joy. And it's a key thing. All right, I think that this is going good. I'll come back in one more video.